These objects block God's graces. We often wonder why the heavens seem silent, why the blessings we've prayed for feel delayed, or why divine favor seems to bypass us while others thrive. But the truth is hauntingly simple. God's grace is not denied to you. It is merely blocked by what you refuse to release. You think it's people, circumstances, or timing that withhold your breakthrough, but look again. Look at what surrounds you. The objects, the memories, the emotional anchors dressed up as keepsakes. Every physical possession you cling to with fear or nostalgia becomes a barrier between your present and the abundance God wants to pour into your life. Grace does not enter where control resides. The external world you've constructed is a mirror of the internal beliefs you have yet to surrender. These things you keep, whether out of fear, pride, or sentiment, are not just objects. They are idols. They whisper false security, and they quietly tell God, I'm not ready to trust you fully. But the Spirit moves only where there is room to move. If you want a new season, you must create space. If you want to live in divine flow, you must evict the symbols of your former bondage. Grace is waiting, not somewhere far away, but just on the other side of your release. External attachments reflect internal resistance. We are conditioned to believe that what we possess defines who we are. The car we drive, the house we own, the clothes we wear, the pictures we display, the awards we hang, all of these become the silent yet loud declarations of our self-image. But here is the hidden truth. These external attachments are not harmless. They are reflections of deep internal resistance. They reveal to us that we have not yet fully surrendered to the divine flow of life. When we hold on tightly to things in the material world, we are actually demonstrating our lack of trust in the unseen. These objects become more than just things. They become symbols of our clinging. They tell the story of our unwillingness to believe that God alone is enough. Look around your environment, the objects you fiercely protect, the items you've outgrown but can't let go of, the belongings you guard as if your identity is wrapped in them. They are not merely there to serve you. They are there to reveal you. They show you where your faith stops and where your fear begins. Because if you truly believed that you are sustained by spirit, not substance, you would hold everything loosely, ready to release it at a moment's call. You would not find your worth in a title, your security in a bank account, or your confidence in the brand name stitched across your chest. The divine life requires detachment, not because objects are evil, but because they easily become substitutes for true identity. They block the grace of God because grace flows only into the open hand, not the closed fist. When your identity becomes entangled with what you own, you create a spiritual short-circuit. Your soul says, I want to grow, but your ego says, I can't lose this. And so you remain stuck, not because God has withheld your blessing, but because you have surrounded yourself with evidence that you do not yet believe you are complete without external support. The truth is, every object carries a vibration. And many of the things you've kept are saturated with the energy of an old season. They were brought into your life during a version of you that God is trying to transform, but you're still holding on to them as if they're sacred relics. What if they're not reminders of who you are, but reminders of who you're no longer meant to be? That outfit in the closet that no longer fits your spirit, that letter you keep rereading from someone who broke you, that job title you keep replaying in your mind though it no longer aligns with your calling, these things are not neutral. They are anchors. They keep you emotionally stationed in a place God already moved on from. And when your internal atmosphere is filled with the vibration of the past, the new cannot enter. Grace requires an internal shift before it can manifest externally. And sometimes that shift starts by letting go of the tangible proof of your inner fears, because when you release the need to be defined by things, you make space to be redefined by truth. The divine doesn't need your possessions to bless you. It needs your obedience to clear the space. There is a reason why so many people declutter their homes and immediately feel emotionally lighter. The physical world is tied to the spiritual world more intimately than we understand. What you see in your environment is often a loud echo of what you believe within. If your space is chaotic, filled to the brim, and weighed down by what you no longer use but can't bear to throw away, it is very likely your inner world looks the same. overcrowded with limiting beliefs, cluttered with unresolved grief, heavy with old stories that no longer serve the journey, and until you address it, you are silently saying to God, I want the new, but I'm not willing to make room for it. The divine responds not to desperation, but to readiness. Are you truly ready for what you've been praying for, or are you still making altars out of your attachments, hoping God will add the new without requiring you to release the old? That is not how spiritual law works. God does not compete for space in your soul. He waits until you release the false gods, the objects you've deified through attachment, before he floods your life with what is truly eternal. That's why miracles often follow a moment of surrender. That's why peace comes not when you gain more, but when you finally let go. Let go of the car that symbolizes your ego. Let go of the dress that reminds you of who he used to love. Let go of the gift from someone who betrayed you, but you've kept it out of sentiment. Let go of the house that feels like home to your past but prison to your future. These things aren't just things. They're spiritual weights. They whisper to your mind that you are still that version of you who needed them to feel whole, but the truth is, you are already whole, you are already loved, you are already complete even without one more item added to your life. The moment you realize that truth is the moment grace begins to flow freely. God's grace is not withheld. It's simply waiting for the space to enter. Create the space by releasing the resistance. Open your hands. Clean your environment, question your attachments, ask yourself, why do I still need this? What does it represent that I'm afraid to live without? When you answer honestly, you will uncover the belief that has been blocking your breakthrough. And once that belief is dissolved, the object will no longer hold power over you. Grace will not be far behind. It will flood in like light entering a room that's been closed for years, and you'll wonder why you waited so long. Grace is generous, but it's not forceful. It does not push past your fear. It waits for your readiness, and readiness begins with release. You cannot enter the kingdom of God with full hands. You must drop what's no longer yours. You must release what once served you but now blinds you. You must let go so that you can grow. These objects were never the source of your power. They were shadows of it. The moment you turn inward, release outward, and align upward, you'll discover that what you lost was never yours to begin with, and what you gain was waiting all along. Sentimental clutter is emotional bondage. We tell ourselves that certain items hold sentimental value, that they remind us of where we came from or who we used to be, and so we keep them. A box of old letters, a faded photograph tucked in a drawer, a gift from someone who once mattered, or even a piece of jewelry that holds the residue of a former life. These are the things we defend with the phrase, I can't throw that away. But what we often fail to realize is that the emotional charge these objects carry is not harmless nostalgia. It is spiritual bondage. These physical remnants of the past are often soaked in the pain, loss, regret, and unhealed wounds of former seasons. And when you keep these things around, you are not just remembering, you are reliving. Every time you glance at that letter, every time you wear that item, every time your hand touches the past disguised as an object, you reattach yourself to a version of yourself that no longer serves your destiny. God wants to do a new thing in your life, but you are still bowing at the altar of what was. You think it's love that keeps you holding on, but many times it's fear. Fear that if you let go of the object, you'll lose the meaning. Fear that if you discard the relic, you'll forget the lesson. But here's the divine truth. The lesson is already within you. The love, the pain, the transformation. It's in your spirit, not the item. The object is not your identity. It is only a symbol. And symbols have power only when you choose to keep feeding them energy. You cannot walk in resurrection while still wrapped in grave clothes. You cannot embrace the new while clinging to shadows of the old. God is not calling you to forget. He is calling you to heal, and healing often looks like release, because as long as those sentimental objects remain, they anchor you emotionally to a frequency that grace has already moved beyond. You may be physically here in the present, but energetically you are bound to yesterday, and this is why your soul feels stuck. This is why you can't move forward, even though you've prayed, fasted, and pleaded. Your hands are still wrapped around memories you were never meant to carry this far, and those memories are encoded in the objects you refuse to let go of. Let's be honest, some of the things you've kept weren't from joyful seasons. They were from times of heartbreak, confusion, betrayal, and yet you keep them tucked away as if they were precious treasures. But in truth, they are spiritual chains. You don't need that necklace from the person who shattered you. You don't need that old journal filled with tears you've already cried. You don't need that voicemail saved on your phone that reminds you of what could have been. What you need is space. Space for new joy. Space for clarity. Space for divine direction. But that space cannot exist while your spiritual atmosphere is cluttered with emotional leftovers. God is not sentimental about your past. He is purposeful about your future. And the reason he nudges you to clean, to declutter, to let go, is not because the item offends him. It's because it is blocking you. It is blocking your capacity to fully embody the new identity he's calling you into. It's blocking your ability to see yourself through eyes of faith rather than memory. You cannot become who you are meant to be while idolizing who you were. Many people unknowingly turn sentimental clutter into shrines of the past. Their home becomes a museum of heartbreaks, victories, and versions of themselves that have long expired, and the tragedy is that they live surrounded by ghosts. Every shelf, every drawer, every closet echoes a former chapter that should have been closed. And this energy bleeds into your present decisions, your emotional state, your clarity of purpose. You wonder why you feel heavy when you walk into your own space. Perhaps it's because every object is whispering a story that no longer aligns with who you are becoming. Sentimental clutter is deceptive because it hides under the guise of importance. It meant something once, we say, and perhaps it did, but what matters more is whether it serves you now. Spiritual maturity requires the discernment to know when something has outlived its season. Just as the Israelites had to leave behind the manna that was only good for a day, you must learn to leave behind the items that only served a purpose in a specific moment. What once fed you can now poison you if kept too long. What once brought comfort can now bring confusion if it becomes a crutch. There is no shame in remembering the past, but there is danger in being defined by it, and the line is often drawn by what you choose to keep. If you truly trust God to write a better story for you, why do you still decorate your life with the remnants of the last chapter? Why do you surround yourself with reminders of who hurt you, who left you, or who didn't see your worth? Is that your truth now, or are you simply refusing to let grace reintroduce you to yourself? The Spirit whispers, "Behold, I make all things new," but many cannot hear it over the noise of yesterday's souvenirs. It is not cruelty to let go. It is alignment. It is obedience. It is faith in motion. You don't need to dishonor the past to release it. You can bless it, thank it, and then move on. That act alone is a declaration. I am no longer a prisoner of what was. I am a participant in what is and what's coming. And that is where grace floods in. That is where the supernatural accelerates. Because God always responds to a soul ready to be emptied of the old. He cannot fill what is already full. He cannot resurrect what you won't bury. Your healing doesn't require another therapy session, another prophecy, or another closed door. Sometimes it just requires a trash bag, a willingness to walk through your space and ask, does this object represent bondage or breakthrough? Does this item reflect who I am or who I used to be? And once you identify it, release it with authority. Because that act of faith speaks louder than words. It is a physical expression of a spiritual truth. You are no longer bound. You are no longer that woman or man. You are no longer grieving what was. You are stepping into what is, and in that sacred moment of release, you will feel the chains fall, not just in your home, but in your heart, because God's grace has always been there. It was never far. It was only waiting for you to let go. Idols disguise themselves as necessities. There are things you claim you cannot live without: items, relationships, routines, titles, and habits you've woven so tightly into your life that they feel like air. But hidden beneath that sense of necessity is something far more dangerous: idolatry. You've given certain objects, people, and circumstances the power to validate your worth, calm your fears, and secure your future. They've become silent idols, dressed in the robes of importance and practicality. They don't sit on altars made of stone, but they occupy the altar of your attention, affection, and trust. And this is the subtle, spiritual deception that blocks the flow of God's grace in your life. Not because He withholds His blessing, but because you've already crowned a substitute Savior. You claim to trust God, yet panic when the car breaks down, the job is threatened, or the person walks away. Why? Because somewhere along the way you began to build your foundation on things instead of truth. You let the visible world dictate your invisible identity. The idol doesn't always look like a golden calf. Sometimes it looks like the phone you can't silence, the bank balance you check obsessively, the career you defend even when it drains you, or the relationship you cling to even when it steals your peace. You tell yourself these things are necessary, but God sees something else. He sees your fear disguised as logic. He sees your dependency masked as responsibility. He sees that what you call wisdom is often just unbelief in religious language. The idols of modern life are not obvious, which makes them all the more dangerous. They pretend to be protectors of your peace, but they actually prevent it, because anything you believe you must have to be whole is an idol. Anything you feel you can't lose without losing yourself has already replaced the throne of God in your heart. Grace cannot flow where you've already decided who your provider is. It cannot enter a space that's already occupied by false securities. God will not bless the thing that stands in His place, and this is not punishment. It is protection, because idols always fail, always. They crumble under pressure, betray your trust, and leave you empty. But not before they drain your time, steal your joy, and rob you of divine connection. This is why God allows certain things to fall apart, not because He's cruel, but because He's jealous for your wholeness. When the thing you depended on collapses, you are forced to face your misplaced worship. You come to the end of yourself and realize the house you built was on sand. This is grace in disguise. The shattering of the idol is the unveiling of the true source. And yet many don't recognize it. Instead of letting the collapse be a call to realignment, they fight to rebuild the idol. They chase the next version of the same false god, another title, another relationship, another possession, believing it will finally bring the safety they crave. But the cycle continues because the heart hasn't changed. The external world only reflects the internal worship. So what are you worshiping? What are you bowing to without even realizing it? What have you placed between you and God's voice? It could be something as simple as a morning routine that doesn't leave space for stillness. It could be the need for control disguised as planning. It could be a desire for status disguised as ambition. The truth is, idols don't demand attention. They absorb it quietly. They lure you in with comfort until you start to trust them more than the presence of God, and then they own you. You begin making decisions to protect the idol instead of obeying the Spirit. You rationalize your disobedience because the idol now determines your priorities. You don't take the leap of faith because the idol needs security. You don't leave the toxic job because the idol is the paycheck. You don't break free from the relationship because the idol is companionship, but what you think you're saving is actually what's holding you captive. The price of keeping an idol is always higher than the fear of losing it. And what's worse, idols don't just block God's grace. They distort your image of God. You begin to think He is distant, silent, uninterested, but the silence is not God ignoring you. It's the static of your own divided heart. You're trying to serve two masters, the true source and the false source, and your spirit knows it. That's why you feel anxious even when everything looks good. That's why peace feels temporary. That's why your prayers hit a ceiling. Because grace flows through surrender, and idols block surrender. They make you believe that letting go is dangerous. They tell you that trust is naive, but trust is the only door grace walks through. Until you confront your idols, you will always operate from fear. You'll make safe choices, not faith choices. You'll stay where it's familiar, not where you're called. You'll ask for blessings, but build your life around backups. But there's freedom on the other side of exposure. When you name your idols, you strip them of their power. When you release them, you reclaim your soul. and when you surrender them, grace flows like never before. Because God can now take his rightful place, not in theory, but in your lived reality. He becomes your peace, your provider, your anchor, not the job, not the relationship, not the bank account, not the image. Just him, and that is when miracles begin to happen, not because you earned them, but because you finally aligned with the truth. You are not defined by what you have, but by who holds you. You are not safe because of what surrounds you, but because of the Spirit within you. And when that becomes your truth, idols lose their allure. You no longer need to control everything because you trust the one who governs all. You no longer panic when things shift because your security is in the unshakable. You no longer need to cling to the visible because you are rooted in the invisible. This is the path to freedom. Not more things, but fewer idols. Not more striving, but more surrender. God is not asking you to live with less joy. He's asking you to live with less bondage. And bondage often wears the mask of necessity. So examine your life. Be ruthless with what you've deemed essential. Ask yourself, is this thing truly serving my divine purpose, or is it silently replacing the God I claim to serve? Because when you remove the mask from the idol, you will find the face of fear, and when you release it, you will find the grace that has been waiting for space to move. God doesn't need your idol to bless you. He needs your trust, and trust begins when you say, even without this, I am still whole. Even without that, I am still provided for. That is the moment heaven responds. That is the moment grace floods in. Not when the idol is upgraded, but when it is surrendered. Your environment echoes your belief system. Walk into any space, a home, a room, an office, and you will hear something speak, though no one opens their mouth. The furniture arrangement, the items on the walls, the books on the shelves, the objects placed with care or left in disarray, all of it speaks loudly about the person who occupies it. Your environment is not just a collection of things, it is a mirror. A reflection, a loud and living echo of your belief system. You may think that what surrounds you is incidental or purely practical, but everything within your environment is infused with the silent power of your inner world. What you tolerate in your physical space reveals what you've accepted within your spirit. If there is chaos in the outer world, it is usually because there is disorder within the inner one. If there is stagnancy in the atmosphere, there is likely fear, confusion, or resignation living somewhere inside your heart. The physical and spiritual realms are deeply entangled. Nothing you see is without meaning. That stack of unopened letters, they may represent your avoidance. That wardrobe filled with clothes you no longer wear but still hold on to, that may be a sign of your resistance to transformation. That drawer filled with broken things you tell yourself you'll fix one day. That may be a subtle way your spirit says, I'm not yet ready to fully move forward. We create spaces to reflect what we believe about ourselves, and those spaces, in turn, reinforce those beliefs every day. This is why your environment is not neutral. It is either contributing to your alignment or sabotaging it. It is either amplifying God's grace or subtly blocking it. You cannot live in a toxic space and expect to feel spiritually free. You cannot surround yourself with reminders of pain, failure, or limitation and expect to soar into divine possibility. Your space must prophesy where you are going, not echo where you've been. If you are called to peace, why is your environment filled with noise? Be it physical, visual, emotional, or spiritual. If you believe God is doing a new thing, why does your home still resemble the energy of your old mindset? You may say you've grown, but does your space reflect that growth? Or are you still living amongst symbols of who you used to be, acting as if God's transformation only lives in theory, but not in practice? What you choose to place around you becomes a reinforcement of what you expect, believe, and accept. And until you examine your environment with spiritual eyes, you may never realize how many invisible agreements you've made with limitation. That vision board you haven't looked at in months, that room filled with unfinished projects, that photo you keep just to punish yourself with memories, all of it is energy, all of it is language. And God speaks through every dimension, including the physical one. That's why in moments of preparation the instruction is often simple. Clean the space, remove what no longer serves, make room, because God cannot fill what you will not empty. He will not pour new wine into old wineskins, and that includes the space you live in every day. You're asking for breakthrough, but do your surroundings say you're ready? You're praying for increase, but have you made space to receive it? You say you're stepping into your calling, but do your daily environments align with that calling or contradict it? Faith is not only what you declare with your mouth, it is what you demonstrate with your choices. And your environment is one of the clearest, boldest demonstrations of your beliefs. That's why you must look at it differently. You must begin to walk into each room and ask yourself, what does this space say about who I believe I am? What am I declaring to God and to the world through what I allow to remain here? The answers may surprise you. That cluttered kitchen may be testifying to your inner feeling of exhaustion. That unused creative space may be revealing your fear of failure. That dusty Bible on the nightstand may be pointing to your drifting priorities. This is not about condemnation, it's about awareness, because once you become aware of the messages your environment is sending, you can begin to shift them. And as you shift them, you will notice something divine begin to happen. Grace starts to flow more freely, inspiration returns, peace expands, clarity sharpens. Why? Because you've created a space where your spirit can finally breathe. You've aligned your outer world with your inner convictions. You've moved from contradiction to congruence. God is not looking for perfection in your space. He's looking for faith. He's looking for signs that you are ready to live from the truth you claim to know. And nothing communicates that faith more clearly than an environment prepared for purpose. When the widow in the Bible was instructed to gather vessels so the oil could flow, it was not just about containers. It was about expectation. She was told to make space, and the oil flowed according to her preparation. So it is with you. The oil of grace, wisdom, provision, and power will not waste itself where there is no room, no intention, no readiness. Your preparation becomes your prophetic act. When you clear out that room, God sees faith. When you donate the clothes of your former identity, God sees surrender. When you remove what feels safe but stale, God sees obedience. And he meets you in that action, not with theory but with manifestation, because he knows now that you are not just speaking about change, you are living it. You are ready to inhabit the version of you he already sees. Your space has caught up to your spirit, so today take inventory. Not just of things, but of energy. Walk through your environment and ask, is this aligned with the person I am becoming? Does this support my peace, my focus, my calling? Or does it anchor me to fear, delay, or past versions of myself? And whatever does not belong, release it, with love, but with finality. You do not owe your past unlimited space in your present. You do not need to preserve reminders of every scar to honor your growth. Sometimes healing means letting go of what no longer reflects your truth. Sometimes spiritual maturity means decluttering the visible to welcome the invisible, because God's grace is always flowing, but it flows where it is welcomed, not where it is resisted. Let your environment become a place of welcome. Let it reflect trust, not fear. Surrender, not control, expectancy, not nostalgia, and watch as heaven responds, not later, but now. Because when your belief system aligns with your space and your space aligns with your purpose, grace finds you quickly. The flow doesn't need to be forced, it just needs to be allowed, and sometimes all that takes is moving a few things out of the way. True grace demands empty space. Grace is not something that can be earned, controlled, or manipulated. It is the divine's free, flowing gift, poured out from love, not merit. But though grace is unearned, it is not ungoverned. It moves with precision, wisdom, and spiritual intelligence, always looking for fertile ground to land in. And the truth often ignored is this: grace will not enter where there is no room. It does not flood a soul cluttered with fear, pride, regret, and attachment. It does not share space with idols, nor compete with your need to control outcomes. Grace waits for surrender. Grace flows into emptiness. And that emptiness is not emptiness in the sense of lack, but emptiness in the sense of readiness, an openness in the heart that says, I no longer rely on what I can see. I trust what I know God can do. You must understand that many times the reason you haven't received what you've prayed for is not because God is unwilling, but because your life is too full for the wrong things. You've filled your schedule with busyness to avoid silence. You've filled your home with objects from a version of yourself God has already outgrown. You've filled your mind with worries, arguments, comparisons, and narratives that have no place in your next chapter. And then you wonder why your spirit feels dry, why your prayers echo back in stillness, why no shift seems to come. The answer is not always to pray harder. It is often to clear the space, because grace is not poured into chaos. It descends into order. It manifests not in the clenched hand, but in the open one. The tighter you hold on to what you think you need, the less capable you are of receiving what God knows you need. But to receive it, you must let go. You must unburden yourself of the belief that you must figure it all out, fix it all, or save yourself. Those burdens block the very help you're praying for. Think about the biblical truth behind the widow and the oil. The oil only kept flowing while there were empty vessels. The moment the vessels stopped, the oil stopped. This is the pattern of grace. It multiplies in spaces prepared for it. It fills what is open. It inhabits what is emptied of self-dependence. Yet many are still living full of yesterday's beliefs, surrounded by yesterday's debris, echoing yesterday's identity. You say you're ready for something new, but the life you live still reflects someone in survival, someone afraid to trust, someone addicted to the illusion of control. But grace is not attracted to performance. It is drawn to humility, and humility is the posture of the one who empties themselves before God, not to be punished, but to be filled with what is divine. True grace does not come to decorate a life built by ego. It comes to rebuild a life surrendered to purpose. That means some things must go before grace can enter: the emotional clutter, the spiritual pride, the mental narratives you cling to as protection, but which are really prisons. Let them fall, let them be cleared, because space is not wasted. It is sacred. That blank area in your schedule may look like nothingness to the world, but to God it is an invitation. That quiet corner you create for prayer may look unproductive to others, but it is the birthing room of miracles. That empty wall, stripped of photos that carried pain, may appear bare, but it now becomes a canvas for revelation. You must begin to see emptiness not as loss, but as preparation, because grace does not fill what is already full, it fills what has made itself available. This is why many spiritual breakthroughs happen after a season of loss. Not because God delights in your pain, but because your pain stripped away what blocked his voice. In loss, the hands open. In grief, the ego dies. In surrender, the soul breathes. And suddenly, grace rushes in, not as compensation, but as revelation. It was always there, but now it has somewhere to land, and this is why you must not fear the clearing. You must not resist the emptying. Yes, it may feel like death, letting go of what comforted you, what defined you, what distracted you. But it is only the death of illusion, and in its place comes the truth, that you were never the source, that you were never meant to carry what you carried, that your power was never in your grip, but in your release. When you release, you trust, and when you trust, you align with the frequency of grace, because grace is not a distant reward. It is a present reality waiting for your permission to flow, and that permission is given through space. Not just physical space, but emotional, spiritual, relational space. You must ask, where have I overfilled my life with things that don't matter, and where have I made no room for what truly does? You must examine your relationships, your conversations, your daily habits, and ask, is this creating space for grace, or is it crowding it out? Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is cancel the meeting. Say no, delete the number, turn off the phone, clear the desk, walk away from the noise. Why? Because in doing so, you're saying to God, I trust you to fill what I've emptied. That is faith, not just hoping he will, but expecting he will. Because he always does. Heaven does not delay out of cruelty. It waits for readiness, and readiness is not about perfection. It's about space. If you want grace to overflow, then live emptied, not of joy, but of noise. Not of ambition, but of ego, not of effort, but of striving. Empty yourself of what blocks and burdens, and you will be surprised how quickly the divine rushes in to fill you. You'll notice opportunities appear with no logical explanation. Peace will guard your heart without changing any external circumstance. Wisdom will rise up in your soul like water from a well you forgot was there. This is what grace does. It restores, revives, repositions. But it demands room. You can't host both fear and favor. You can't cling to the past and walk fully in promise. You can't build altars to yesterday and still expect God to reveal tomorrow, so clear it out. Tear it down, let it go, make space. Not just in your home, but in your heart, in your time, in your thoughts, and let that space be the canvas where grace writes its masterpiece. Because God isn't looking for more of your hustle. He's looking for your surrender, and surrender always begins with space.